Hey, everybody, and welcome to your next. I'm your host, Jerome. We're going out west. We've been all over the place. We've been in Canada, we've been across the pond in Europe. Now we're out in Arizona with Allan Crockett. He reached out on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, and I tell you what, it's been just a hoot getting to know him, learn about him and his process. And I think you guys are in for a real treat today. Allan, how are you, man? So good to see you.
Good to see you, Jerome. I'm doing really good. I appreciate you having me on the show and look forward to our time together today.
You took your hat off, man. What's going on? I love cowboy hats. Why you not wearing it in the office today, huh?
Well, not in the office. I don't know, there's 4 or 5 of them sitting in here and another 4 or 5 in the house.
Good man. So let's start there, right? So how did you? What's the story behind the hats? Are you a cowboy? What's going on?
Yeah, I've ranched and had horses and cattle basically my whole life, and so it's I grew up wearing a cowboy hat and I guess it's one of those identity things. I can't put it away.
So if I'm not mistaken, you built a couple of businesses over your journey. One, you had an exit that you didn't like too much, and you're building another one that's really impactful, and I'm really excited to talk about that. But as a kind of a prerequisite for being on here, they've had to have an exit, and so can we go back and talk about the business that you built, that you exited from, and had the outcome that wasn't as favorable as maybe you desired it to be?
Yeah, we'll go back a little bit before that, but I when I went to college, I got a degree in animal science and business, and I got a job right out of college as a ranch manager on a large ranch here in Arizona. And I was working for an absentee owner. He didn't live at the ranch, but I ran that ranch for him, and he decided to sell the ranch, and he came to me and told me he was going to sell it, and I was, I don't know, early 30s at the time, 31, 32, somewhere along in there. And he says, I know it's hard for young people to get started in ranching because you're usually talking several $1 million to buy land and cattle and whatnot. And it's not just something you go down the bank and borrow it and get started. But um, anyway, he says, I want to help finance you into your own place once this place sells.
Wow.
And and I told him, I said, you don't owe me anything. I've given you an honest day's work and you've given me an honest day's pay. We're even. He said, it's not about that. He said, I just want to help you. I know how hard it is to get starting and I want to help you do that. And I said, well, all right, great. Well, I stayed and helped him sell the ranch. And when it sold, I got a letter in the mail telling me to get my family, my cattle, and my horses and be off the place in 30 days. And that was the last of it. So there was an exit there that did not end the way I wanted it to end. Um, and I'd put blood, sweat, and tears into that place just like I owned it myself. I mean, I ran it and managed it like it was my own place. If it was hot outside or cold outside or raining or snowing, I still went and did the work because it needed to be done. And at one time, I probably had, 4 or 5 full-time guys working for me and a couple, 2 or 3 part-time guys during the summer. And it was our home and we lived at the ranch and then it was like, all right, get out. And so we did and it was tough. And then a few years later I started another business of my own and after about 3 years the bank shut me down.
Oh
And
no.
that's not the kind of exit you want to go through. Uh, Financially I left with nothing and that's not a good place to start. It's and it was tough. Emotionally, it was tough. And so the idea of an exit, whether you exit voluntarily, whether you sell a business, whether you retire, there's some commonalities that come out of that. And
100%.
and some of it, as you're well aware, Jim, some of it's loss of identity.
Big
And
piece.
a big piece of it, if you've been the CEO of a big company and now you're no longer the CEO, or if you're an entrepreneur that started and built something really big and now it's no longer there, um, who are you without that company? And who are you becoming rather than what are you achieving now? Because there's achievement in the business world, and then it's who am I becoming and what is this next chapter all about? And so it's that loss of identity is a huge thing, and people don't, and I say people, the majority of people don't see that coming, and it slaps them up the side of the face, whether it's the first Monday morning or 6 months later on a Wednesday morning, and it's like, who am I? What am I doing? And it could be you got a big vacation planned with your wife or your kids, your family or something, grandkids, I don't know. And you go do that, and when you come home, well, we're going to take a few days and play golf or whatever it happens to be. But sooner or later, it's going to come back and haunt you. And it's like, who am I? What am I supposed to do now? And and I started seeing that. I told you the other day, my grandpa shared with me that when he turned the business over to my dad, and we had cattle and farm, and he said, I got more tired the first year in retirement than I ever did when I was working. And my dad had some corrals he wasn't using. My grandpa went and bought some cattle and some calves and put in those corrals, started feeding them, gave him purpose, gave him something to do. And so there's a void that happens, and it's how we handle that void.
So you mentioned your grandfather being more tired in his first year. What does that actually mean? Because he wasn't working more than he'd been working. So what was he trying to describe when he said he's more tired being retired than he was when he was working?
Yeah, it is a physical tiredness, but it comes because there's no emotional stimulation. We're not doing anything. I mean, he had a house and a yard and, a little bit in his backyard where he'd grow some corn or some vegetables or something, and gave him a little bit to do. But it's when you get up in the morning and you have direction and focus, here's what I have to do today. Here's what needs to be done in the business. You go do that and you come home and yeah, you're tired, but you get up the next morning and you're ready to go again. And when you get up in the morning and you don't have that draw that's pulling you forward, and you get up and, back in the day, you read the newspaper or something like that, and you sit there and it's like, okay, now what do I do? And there's
So
nothing
did
to do. And then you get emotionally tired that just drains you physically also.
Yeah, I think the body keeps score for sure. So when you had your exit, did you experience a similar tiredness, or did you go straight into working a job or something else and you didn't have the gap in between to actually experience what your grandfather experienced?
Yeah, mine was a little bit different because, I we had I guess we had all five of our children at that time. We have five children. And
Wow.
so I have a son and four daughters, and now we have 10 grandkids, but that's beside the point. But anyway, I had to work, had mouths to feed and that kind of thing. And so I went and got a job, and it was not a job that I really wanted. It was not my forte. It was not something I really wanted to do. I've been outdoors my whole life and agriculture, and now I'm in this office, and it was 4 years of misery.
Oh no.
And when I left there, it was like, hallelujah, I'm free again. I don't have a job, I don't have a boss, I don't, and being an entrepreneur, it was like, okay, what's now what? What am I going to do? It's the same question, now what?
Mhm.
And and I had done some consulting work back in the late 80s and early 90s.
Mhm.
And and uh and so I kind of went back that direction and started doing some consulting work. And then I I got some professional help with some business coaches, and I realized there was a big difference between a coach and a consultant. And so I shifted gears and elevated what I was doing and raised the bar and became a coach. And instead of a consultant, I stopped telling people what to do and tried to lead them to discovery. And I remember one time I was working with a, a business owner in northern Colorado, and he had a manager working for him, and I this is like the third time I'd been to his business to help him, and it was time for me to leave. I needed to get back to Denver, my rental car, get in my airplane, get in a airplane and fly home. And he says, "Well, what are we supposed to do now?" And there was flip chart pages hanging on the wall that we'd filled out some stuff and taped them up there. He could look at it.
Mhm.
I said, "I'm not going to tell you what to do." And he got irate with me for a minute. He says, "We always get to this point and then you don't tell us what to do." And I says, "I'm not going to tell you this time either." But he
What gave
knew,
you the courage to do that, though?
oh, I don't know. It just evolved over time that, I had led them through a process and they had come to a discovery point. They knew what to do, but they
Yeah.
wanted me to tell them, and I wasn't going to
Uh-huh.
do it. And so I left, and I got an email the next day, and he said he and his manager were talking after I left, and he says, we wouldn't have it any other way. We don't want somebody to come and tell us what to do, but it's kind of a scapegoat. You know, if
Yeah.
Jerome tells me what to do and I go do it, it doesn't work. Well, that's Jerome's fault now that it didn't work in my business. I mean, that can be the attitude. Now, it could be I didn't do it the way you said to do it, or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
but but to me, it's, you're the owner of the business. Take ownership for it. I'm here to help you and provide some guidance and share some experience and some knowledge in that. But ultimately, you have to make that decision. And so make it, man up and make the decision, you know.
You want them to take ownership of it, right? And
Right.
that's the game. So you said something that was really interesting. I watch a lot of people condemn coaching and say it's a sham or a waste of money. And you described it as elevating from being a consultant. What do you see as the difference between a coach and a consultant, and why you felt like it was worthy to change your title?
I guess when I got around a couple of really good coaches and and I went through their processes with them, and it was kind of the same thing. They led me to discovery, and they said, "Okay, now what are you going to do with this information?"
Mhm.
Instead of them saying, "Okay, you need to go home and do A, B, C, and D, or one, two, three, four, whatever it is," they asked me, "What are you going to do with this information now?" And so I had to answer that. Well, this is what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
And so the onus comes back on me, and the responsibilities, which is where it should be. If I'm an entrepreneur or I'm a business leader, that responsibility is mine. It's not the coach or the consultants. And so it just dawned on me one time that, wow, this is way more powerful than me saying, okay, I'm getting ready. And when I first started doing consulting, where I'd come home and I'd spend 3 or 4 hours on the computer typing up a report and send people the report. This is what we talked about, and this is what we did, and here's my recommendations, and blah 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 blah. Ugh. I mean, I hated doing it, and these coaches I worked with, they never sent me a report. They didn't do that. What are you going to do with this information? And so it was on me, and it's like I like that model a whole lot better. And so I just started using that model as a coach and said, okay, here's the information. What are you going to do with it? And that
Love it.
I continue that today, working with people after the exit. I don't tell them what to do. You know, y- Obviously you build a business. You're an entrepreneur or you're a CEO, you've led a business and you've retired or you've sold out, you've exited, or you're thinking about doing that in the future. So the question is, what are you going to fill this void with that this business has? It's occupied so much of your time and your energy, physical energy, emotional and mental energy. It's taxed that. Now, what
Uh-huh.
are you going to do when that's gone? Because that void is going to be big. And if I could share an analogy back to, ranching and nature, nature hates bare ground. and nature will do anything it can to cover up bare ground. And if you have a yard or you have a driveway, you have a sidewalk, any place there's bare ground along the edge, what comes in there?
Weeds.
Weeds come in. Exactly, Jerome. Weeds come in. And we don't want weeds, so we go out there and spray them or hoe them or do something with them. And what comes in the next time? More weeds. And it's a vicious
Every
cycle.
time.
Yeah, we just keep trying to get rid of these weeds in this void, this piece of bare ground that has weeds coming in. We don't want to see weeds, so we spray them, we hoe them, we clean them out, or we have our yard guy do it or whatever.
Yeah.
But we don't want weeds. And instead of looking at it, okay, I don't want weeds. Well, what do I want there?
Hmm.
And so that void, if we take that metaphorical expression of what happens in nature and we bring it back to us and we're part of nature and now this business has been separated from us, either from retirement or a sale, and now we have this big bare ground, if you will. And if we don't put something in there, the weeds are going to start growing in. And the weeds are going to be what somebody else wants us to do. Uh, it's going to be things that waste our time and our energy, things that don't bring us fulfillment, but we get busy and we fill it with busyness rather than in something that is really purposeful and meaningful to us. And so by doing that, we end up in a not good situation. I ran into a buddy of mine. I've known him my whole life, and a couple of my grandkids and a couple of his were in some kind of music thing together, and
Yeah.
and we walked out. It was at a college, and they're little kids, but we walked out of this college auditorium, where they had performed, and we're outside, and we just bumped into each other. And I asked him, he had a really nice business and he sold it for good money. And I says, how's retirement going for you?
No, well.
And he says, it's just a word, Allan. That's all it is. It's just a word. And it was very obvious that this piece in his life that, supposed to be the golden years and really have enjoyment, now get to do what you really want to do. You retired, you have money. Just a word, Allan. That's all it is. It's just a word. And and I've seen him since then, and I know he's found some things, and I can see it in his eyes and in his face, and he's excited about some of the things he's doing. But at that point, he wasn't. And
Mm.
so I think that's the thing. That void from selling his business had filled up with weeds,
Hmm.
other people's priorities, things that other people wanted him to do that did not light him up, did not bring him joy and satisfaction and give him purpose. And so then it's just a word. And so if we want to have fulfillment in this next chapter, we have to find that purpose, even our ultimate purpose. And and to me, business success is one thing, but that does not equate automatically to life success. And so that's what we're after. Okay, what's this next chapter? What's success look like in that? And I mean, we got to have time and money together. Those are givens. If years ago, I mean, it's probably 20 years ago now or more, a guy I knew retired, and I ran into him at the parts store one day, and auto parts store, and I said, "How's retirement?" And he says, "It's for me." He says, "It's like being on vacation. I don't have any money to go anywhere."
Oh no.
And so it's like, all right, well, you got time, but you don't have money, so you're just living. You're just going through the motion, and that's not good. And the
No.
other thing happens, a lot of times in business, we have money, we're profitable, but we are so busy in business, we can't get away. So there's no
No
time.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've experienced that. I've experienced that. And so it's those two things, time and money in tandem together,
Yeah.
that we can control and we can do what we want. So that's two of them. But I think there's three other sides of that. One of them is purpose. What is our
Okay.
purpose now? And we really have to discover what that purpose is. And if we don't discover it, then the void stays void and it fills with weeds. But if we discover what our purpose is, now we can start saying no to all these other things because we have that bigger yes drawing us forward and pulling us forward. So purpose is part of it, but then relationships. And I think this is a big one for people because if you go to the office, you own the company or a CEO or you're CEO of your own company, you go to the office, you have a team of people around you.
Hmm.
You might have an executive assistant, you might have a CFO, you have a secretary, and your calendar is filled, and somebody wants to talk to you. They talk to your secretary. She puts it on the calendar, or she sends them a link, and they find a time and a day that works, and they get on your calendar. But your day is busy. It's structured. You have lots of things going on, and all of a sudden that structure is gone, and the relationships with the people that you worked with are gone. Maybe you get invited to somebody's Christmas party or something, but the people that you dealt with every day, are, they're not part of your life. And even
They're
for
not.
married, yeah, and even for married people, you're at home and your spouse is at home and your spouse is thinking, you know, don't you have something to do? You're just sitting there, you know. This is what this is like. Yeah, we had that vacation and now we just sit and stare at the wall. I mean, so the compatibility there between a husband and wife is huge. Th- that is different than what it's probably ever been. And many times, a husband and wife both have their own business or career or whatever, and they reach this exit point at about the same time. Maybe one gets there a year or two before the other one, or maybe the spouse has been away from the workforce for 5 or 6 years, but the spouse still has the things that he or she does, regularly during the week, whether it's, go out with the girls or go out with the guys or go golfing
Hmm.
or whatever. And it's like, my wife's getting ready to go. So where are you going? Well, I always go here on Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday mornings or whatever it is. And well, I thought we were going to do something together. Well, yeah, we spent 2 days staring at the wall. I'm going to go do this with my friends like I always do. And so there's a compatibility thing that we have to focus on relationships because we've lost some when we left the business. Well, who are those relationships now? And it could be a spouse, could be kids, grandkids. Uh, but we have to strengthen those relationships to have that quality of life. And then the other leg of that I'm finding is more and more important is health. We talk about lifespan. Let's talk about health span. And if your joints are hurting or if you don't have energy because you're not eating right, you're not exercising, not taking care of yourself, that next chapter is not going to be near as much fun as what it could be if you're healthy. So to me, eating right and exercising right becomes a big part of this next chapter, a big part of what we need to be doing. So quality of life, that's my focus, and helping people
So,
figure it out for them. Go ahead. You had a question.
no, I was just thinking, I just wanted to restate. So you got five: time, treasure, money, purpose, health, and relationships. That's
Yeah.
the five, right? And
Yep.
then I want to go back because you said some really cool things and kind of let you run through them, but I feel like it's worth pulling on the string. So initially, you had this comment around, and you kind of filled it in, but I want to put a point on it. You had this comment around weeds, and I'll call the other stuff flowers, but like, and what gets planted in the bare ground. How can you tell if it's a weed or not?
In our personal lives, you're talking about now, not
Hmm.
in the yard. Yeah, in our personal life, the weeds. I think what really distinguishes it is is if you say, well, crap, I got to go to this board meeting. I volunteered to be on this board or something, and now we got another meeting, and I'm not excited about it. That's a weed. If you're saying, yeah, man, I'm going to this meeting this afternoon or in the morning, I got this meeting. I'm really excited to go be part of this board. I like these people and it lights you up and brings you energy. It's not a weed. But if
Okay.
it's like, oh gosh, here we go again, you know, I go to this meeting, they don't have an agenda. We sit there and, and we don't get anything accomplished. I'm going to resign. That's a weed.
So if it brings you energy, it's a
Yeah.
flower. If it takes energy away, it's a weed. How does that connect to purpose? How do you define purpose?
Purpose to me, so so in business, when you're running your own business, you have purpose. And you're growing a business and maybe you started with nothing and you've grown it up now and the revenue's good and you're making money and there's a purpose. And you might even be thinking ahead, which everybody should be, but too often we don't. Be thinking ahead, okay, one of these days I'm going to sell this business and I'm trying to make this business so it's not dependent on me, so that it's worth more money when I sell it. And and so we have all that purpose behind us, and then we retire or we sell the business and the purpose disappears. And that's when we get up in the morning and we turn on Netflix and we veg there for 6 or 7 hours and we get up and fix a sandwich or something and turn the TV back on. There's no purpose in that. So the purpose to me is, I think it's something that we discover, and we discover you can do it on your own. Okay, you build a company or you let a company, you're very capable of figuring out your next purpose. The problem is most of us are lost and we get stuck and we need somebody to help us get us unstuck and guide us through a process so that we can really identify what that ultimate purpose is for this next chapter. So the purpose could be any number of things. It could be mentoring a young person. If you've been a successful entrepreneur, well, maybe you mentor a couple of entrepreneurs and, maybe you do it for pro bono, you don't get paid. Maybe you do it for a piece of the pie.
Hmm.
Hey, I'll come in and for, a 5% equity position in your company or 10%, whatever the number is. I'm just grabbing one out of the sky. I will help you and I'll help you be successful. So again, now you have purpose. I'm not going to the office every day. I'm not holding your hand. I'm not answering your phone for you, but I'm giving you guidance on the things that are important that you need to focus on and the things that you need to delegate to somebody else, either an internal member of your team or an external member, whether it's a hired CFO that's not an employee, but that's, they work with several companies and take care of the books and that. Well, then hire that done because your purpose in your business is to grow that business, serve people, serve a customer, and obviously you want to make money in the process. Well, now that's disappeared. Let's figure out what the next purpose is. So it could be mentoring somebody. I had a couple here in my office one time and very successful business, making good money. Net revenue was close to 1 million a year. They were working 12, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. And she says, I just want to have time to go to church on Sunday. And she couldn't. So there's a purpose. I want to go to church on Sunday. Then later she said, I think it'd be really cool if we did some mini church missions someplace in the world. And I don't know what religion they were. I didn't ask. It doesn't matter. But there was purpose for her that she was not getting outside the business. I want to go serve people. And maybe it was go, help them dig a well and have water in a community. Maybe it was, solar energy or something so they could have lights on in their house. Or I have no idea what it meant for her, but she said that. and she wasn't getting that from her business. I think those are the kinds of things that we need to focus on. What lights you up? And it could be starting another business. It could be a coaching business. It could be, starting something from scratch. It could be service to a community. It could be service to the world in a foreign country someplace, third world service. But it has to light you up. If it doesn't light you up, if it's drudgery, then it's a weed that needs to go. So we have to discover what that is. And I guess I've been fortunate. I've been blessed with the ability to ask lots of questions and help people, come up with what their purpose is.
So this is interesting because some people would say that you have to do some stuff that you don't like. Like there are some obligations in life. And what you're offering, if I understand correctly, is the fastest indicator for whether or not you're doing what you're supposed to do is how you feel about doing it.
Yeah, um, there are times, you know, I've built a lot of fences on cattle ranches and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't particularly like building fence. It's not, oh boy, I get to go build fence today. I'm all excited. That doesn't light me up. But if I'm working with a couple of guys that I like working with,
Uh-huh.
building fence can be enjoyable. It's just not the top of, the list of things that bring me pleasure.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to go, genetically, let's improve this cow herd and let's start figuring out how to do that. That really excites me,
Uh-huh.
or let's look at ecology and how can we improve the soil health and improve biology in the soil and grow more grass and have clean water in our creeks and streams on this piece of land. That lights me up. Helping you figure out what your next chapter is all about lights me up. I love working with people and bang, the light bulbs go on and
Yeah.
oh, that's what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And I know
So,
you've done that, and you've at a workshop or one-on-one or speaking, and you're watching your audience. And you see somebody connected, and it's like, all right, I did some good today in the world.
yeah. I don't know that there's anything more rewarding than just that, seeing the light come
Yeah.
back on. So, through a questioning process, you're able to help people identify what their purpose is, and then they're able to go out and execute against that and make decisions against whether this is moving me closer to my purpose or not.
Yeah. So so let's back up just a little bit. I told you
Okay.
the other day that I created this diagnostic, and I'm not here to sell the diagnostic. Somebody wants it, they go on my website and find it.
Yeah.
But the diagnostic is a starting point because it brings awareness. And I really, if you have a partner or a spouse, I really want them to take it with you. You take it independently, but it shows where you are in relation to one another and it shows where gaps are. So that's the awareness, so that brings awareness. Well, let's take that awareness now and then let's do either some one-on-one work or come to a workshop and we'll do a group session together for a couple of days. But we'll begin with that awareness. And then in the workshops, let's start figuring out where these gaps are and how we need to bring them together. And as we walk through that process, you'll start figuring out what your purpose is and what lights you up. So at the end of a 2-day workshop, you have a plan in place now. And you
Hmm.
could say, and I like to look at it as, we're at a fork in the road. You have your plan. You want to go home and execute it on your own, go home and execute it on your own. Or if you want to take the other fork in the road, you can continue to work with me as part of a community of like-minded peers that are going through this next chapter together, and we'll work through it together and implement your plan together. And either way works. It's your choice. Yeah, no, I want to do it on my own. Go home and do it on your own. You have my blessing. Do it. No, I want to be part of a group and I want to continue to work with you. Great. This is what it looks like. So to me, in that kind of a community, um, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the smartest one in the room. And I think the collective knowledge and wisdom of everybody in the room is way more than any individual. And that's why I
Mhm.
like doing group workshops and group experiences together because, if 20 of us are sitting in a room, you'll think of a question to ask that I hadn't thought of. Now I'll remember it to ask it the next time, but you'll think of one, and Sally will think of one, and Jill will think of one, and Joe will. And so we get that collective wisdom and collaboration, and and yet you leave with your own individualized plan that works for you. I leave with mine. Sally leaves with hers, and et cetera, et cetera. And I like these. I want couples to come to these because this next chapter, we're going to spend a lot of time together. If we're married or have a significant other, we're going to spend a lot of time together. And we need to be on the same page. So the diagnostic provides awareness to where we're not on the same page, where some alignment issues come up. You come to the workshop gets us on the same page. We leave with a plan that's structured, that's focused to help us get there. And then, you either continue to be part of the community or not. So,
So, is there a common misalignment, or what is the most common misalignment for the folks that you've served?
well, that's a really good question. I don't know if there's a most common misalignment. I don't use this word, but I'll use it here to make a point. And the word is expectations. You
Okay,
know,
that's a
it's
good
not a
word.
it's not a four-letter dirty word or anything, but expectations, if I expect my spouse to just come along with me because this is what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and she's expecting me to spend some time with her, we have these, and too many times they're unspoken expectations, and that creates friction. And then we start feeling resentment inside because we had an expectation that was not met, it went unfulfilled,
Yes.
and and we don't speak it, it's unspoken. And so then it elevates and elevates and elevates, and then one day we really butt heads. And um, several years ago, gosh, it's been probably 15, 20 years ago, a friend of mine was working construction as an employee. And, one year he got I think it was an $800 Christmas bonus.
Mhm.
The next year it was $1,200. And the next year it was $1,600. It was going up $400 every year. The next year it went back to 1,000,
Um,
and he was ticked
yeah.
because he had an expectation
Yeah.
that it'd be $400 more this year. I remember him telling me, I worked every bit as hard this year as I did for him last year. I helped him, and so there's an expectation, and he's frustrated now because the expectation was unmet, unfulfilled.
Right.
And there was never any agreement. And so that's the word I like to use is agreement. There was never any agreement that the bonus would go up $400 a year, the Christmas bonus. It was tied to nothing except Christmas. And and apparently the business owner said, well, we just didn't do as well this year, financially.
Right.
And if you've had a 7 or 8 figure exit, or if your salary is, a strong 6 figure salary, or maybe even a 7 figure salary, well, $400 is nothing. I mean, that's a good dinner out on the town with your spouse or a couple of friends or something. But for a working man, $400 is a lot of money. For
Makes
a
a
blue
difference
collar
for sure.
worker, so it's a different kind of thing. So expectations, and that's part of what I do when I work with people. Let's get expectations off the table. And let's
Mhm.
just talk and let's come to an agreement on what we want this next chapter to look like, as far as husband and wife. And if there's no spouse or no significant other, then all right, let's come to an agreement with ourself, our own inner self, about what we want this next chapter to look like. And because, a friend of mine in Louisiana, I was on the phone with him here, 6 months or so ago. He sold a business. And I said, what are you going to do now? He says, for the first 2 weeks, I'm sitting on the couch and doing nothing.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I can tell you after the second day, that's going to get old. It ain't going to last 2 weeks. But he
Yeah.
had a trip planned. He and his wife, they're going 3 weeks, 4 weeks to Austria, and I mean, then they had a riverboat cruise as part of the trip. They had some good things planned. All right, that's cool. What are you going to do when you get back? You know,
Yeah. That's
and
where
he's
the
not a
rubber meets the
client.
road.
Yeah, exactly. He's not a client. I just asked him out of curiosity and friend, what are you going to do next? But but finding that purpose, um, I like for people just to look at it as a clean slate. If you look at the old days, the slate was a chalkboard and you wiped it clean and you have a clean slate. Design
Uh-huh.
anything you want to design now.
Yeah.
And I remember a client of mine, the client actually lived in the southeast, but he had a business in Idaho, and he and his brother were partners in the business, and his brother passed away. And he called me and he says, I want this business to be profitable. He says, do anything you have to do to make it profitable. And he says, you have a clean slate.
Mm.
And so, he had a COO there, chief operating officer there, and manager, whatever you want to call him. Anyway, I made a trip to that business once a month, and we spent about 3 days, 3 or 4 days together. I think I flew up on a Monday and flew home on a Thursday or something, and maybe it was a Friday. But anyway, but I told him, I said, we have a clean slate. And we looked at every enterprise in that business, and the ones that weren't profitable, we got rid of them.
Mm.
And he had identity tied to those. He didn't want to get rid of them. And
No.
no, no, it's not making money. We either fix it or we get rid of it.
Yeah.
And the ones that weren't fixable, we got rid of them. And gosh, you talk about a lot of pushback. You know, a lot of the yeah, but what if next year it's different? Yeah, but what if this changes? And yeah, but that, and yeah, but this. No, 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 no. We're looking at today.
The
And if it's not working
purpose is
today,
clear. You gave me a
yeah,
clear mission.
yeah, I have a clean slate and we're starting from scratch. And
Yeah.
and and that business is extremely profitable today. Matter of fact, the guy that hired me, his biggest complaint now is I'm paying too much taxes. But you
He'd be
know,
all right.
yeah, tough problem to have. At least you're not subsidizing the business anymore. So, but I think that alignment and getting rid of expectations, and let's just have some agreement. We don't need to. I mean, it's not like we're going to go to an attorney as a husband and wife and sit down and let's formalize our agreement. That's not what this is about. It's just, we have an agreement, and when we do that,
Mhm.
and this is good for people that are in business still, and especially a family business. And family business, we probably need to write down these agreements that are business agreements. But for the next chapter, let's just make some agreements, and let's get rid of that dirty word expectation, and let's not live on expectations and then be frustrated when the expectations become unfulfilled. And
Mhm.
and it's always the person that had the expectation is the one that becomes frustrated,
I
you
I
know?
love that. Though I think it's so easy for us to slip in to these unmet expectations that were never shared with the other person. I often think of, these apex performers, these top performers who are building these businesses being frustrated because they're not getting the support that they feel they deserve or want or even need, but they haven't told anybody what they're working on or how they can help them. And so when people don't
Exactly.
show up to do that because they can't read their mind, they're disappointed. And I know that, and I'm guilty of it myself, of, being unwilling to share because I don't want somebody to tell me no or tell me yes and then not follow through. But in the same breath, like you can create a whole story of the whole world being against you and not supporting you or not caring. And it's all because you didn't vocalize your needs, wants, and desires. Uh, Allan, this has been a great episode, man. Like we've covered so much ground from your exit to experiences with various clients and friends who've transitioned from the working to the retired, even though it's just a word. Um, and so, you know, if the listeners out there and they're like, man, if Alan could give me one thing to take away from the episode, what would you say that is?
If I left you with one thing, I would say the transaction does not equal transformation.
Ooh, that's good.
So the transaction is a financial thing with a lot of legal papers, and we're signing papers, and the money is wired to the bank account or to our brokerage firm or whatever. But that's the transaction. That does not equal transformation. Those are not synonymous terms. And
Uh-huh.
so the transaction may have created a a lot of money for us. It may have created a lot of time for us, but it also created that huge void that we talked about earlier.
Hmm.
And it's up to us to say, okay, who am I becoming? What is my identity now that I'm no longer the owner of this business? Um, a real quick example, a friend of mine in your state of North Carolina was was at his wife's job's Christmas party. Oh, I think it was a year ago last December, and somebody said, "Well, what do you do?" And he answered it, "I used to do," and told him what he
Yeah.
used to do. And,
Yeah.
and yet he couldn't actually verbalize what he was doing today. And we got to get to that point. We
Hmm.
can't just say, well, I'm retired. What do you do?
Yeah.
Now that your identity from that business is no longer you, that's the transformation that I want to help people figure out and help them experience. It's not the transaction. It's let's figure out your ultimate purpose and what you need to do going forward. So I think that's the thing that I would say. I guess if there was one other thing, it would be C.S. Lewis, the great author. C.S. Lewis said, "You're never too old to set a new goal or to dream a new dream." And so those are the people I love working with, the people that I don't care what their age is, but they recognize that they are not too old to set a new goal or to dream a new dream. Now let's get together and let's build a new world together of whatever it is in your world you want to create, because you're a creator. I mean, we're all creators. Let's create now at a higher level than what we have in the past, and it may not be tied to money this next time. It may just be tied to purpose, and we have the financial means to really create something that will outlive us, that will create a living legacy that lasts lots longer than we do in this earth or in this life.
That is beautiful. Um, and so the work that you are assigned, your purpose work, how do they find out more about that?
You can go to allancrockett.com. It's ALLANCROCKETT, allancrockett.com, and everything that I'm doing today is on that website. There's you want to schedule a conversation, you can get on my calendar and schedule a conversation, and we can just talk, and there's no cost for that. I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody just to see if I mean, you may talk to me for 15 minutes and say, "Ugh, I don't want to ever talk to that guy again." And if you have that, that's okay. I mean, there's no hard feelings on that. But you may come to a bit of discovery that, hey, uh, there's a connection. I want to work with this guy, and then we'll just talk about what that looks like. I am not a arm twister. I am not a high pressure salesman. It either fits or it doesn't fit. And if I'm a round hole and you're a square peg, it don't fit. So let's don't try to make it fit. So
100%.
yeah. So
100%.
and I'm on LinkedIn. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. I post 2 or 3 times a week there, and you can message me on there if you want to. My email address is on my website. You can send me an email if you'd like to. But yeah, it's been great, Jerome. I've enjoyed visiting with you.
Man, this has been awesome. To our listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.